All right, friends. Thank you for joining us this morning. Just as a clarification, because I've already had some questions this morning, this training is for your technology coordinators. More specifically, it's kind of like the preparation for administration of Utah Aspire Plus. This is not the Utah Aspire Plus training. That one is scheduled for next week, Thursday, January 31st. If you need more information, you can shoot me an email and I can get that for you. So for our technology coordinators today, I'm going to go ahead and introduce Emily really quickly with USBE. She is our support specialist who is monitoring our chat. She has asked, there's a chat message in there to use your first and last name along with your LEA for your username, and then raise your hand for questions and she will be able to unmute you if the question is too long to put in the chat, but you can always use the chat as well. My name is Elise Fry. I am the Test Administration and Formative Assessment Specialist with USBE. And I'm going to go ahead and introduce Dawn Brandt, who is one of our program managers with our Pearson team, and she will introduce her team as well.
Yes, thanks, Elise, and good morning, everyone. As Elise mentioned, my name is Dawn Brandt, and I am the program manager at Pearson. This morning, I'm joined by two of my colleagues. One is Tyler Hicks, and he is the project manager for the Utah Aspire Plus assessment here at Pearson. And then presenting today is Brian Martins, who's part of our technical engineering team that will be addressing a lot of the things that you need to know in order to prepare all the technology used, again, for the Utah Aspire Plus. So again, welcome, and I will turn this over to Brian.
All righty, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Brian Martins here, field engineering team. And today we're going to go over the technology coordinator training for Utah. So with that, we'll dive right into it here and talk about the first piece of the puzzle, which is all the resources that are available to you. The various support pages and resource portals to get information on testing, get TestNav, get details about TestNav itself. So the first thing is the Utah portal, and I think if you remember nothing else out of these three sites that I'm about to show you, this is the one you want to remember. Utah.mypearsonsupport.com. From here, you can get to the other stuff that I'm about to cover here. So remember that this is the main portal, and it's got a technology setup tab in there that pertains specifically to what we're dealing with, and information about technology resources, how to download TestNav, how to go to the online documentation, all that stuff. So remember this one, if nothing else, and it'll get you everywhere else you need to go. The next one is the TestNav online support page, which is at support.assessment.pearson.com/TN. If you just go to the root URL to the .com, you can select TestNav and it'll get you there. But this is where all the online documentation is, how to set up and use TestNav on the various platforms, the requirements for both the network as well as TestNav itself, how to troubleshoot things, how to get look at all the error codes, which we'll talk about later, how to get log files if you ever need to, as well as technical bulletins you can see here. So there's a ton of information that's covered on this site. You want to remember this so that you can not only know how to set things up if you need to look anything up in the documentation, as well as if you need to troubleshoot something. And then finally, download.testnav.com, which is where you can go to download TestNav to install on your student devices so that they have the testing application on their devices. So again, if you remember nothing else, remember that main portal that I put there at the beginning, utah.mypearsonsupport.com, and that will get you to all this other stuff. And from there, we'll change gears a little bit and we'll talk about the general setup and requirements. And this checklist, ironically, used to be a lot longer. The good news is it's getting simpler and simpler to set up every year. And so the main things that you need to do to set up your environment in the order that I would do them in is configure your firewalls and content filters first. Then install TestNav on your student devices. You're going to want to run app check on a handful of those devices to see if it can run successfully and lock down the device successfully. And then finally run network check a little bit, on probably each location that you're at, just to see that you're not going to run any potential bandwidth issues, which I don't think is really a problem anymore in school environments. Bandwidth is abundant and plentiful and cheap, so it shouldn't be an issue, but it's worth taking your time to test that quick. And we're going to cover all this stuff here today. So the first piece on that checklist was firewalls and content filters. The infrastructure requirements are found on the TestNav online support page that I showed you just a little bit earlier. It's got this entire list of URLs that you're going to want to make sure that you configure your firewalls and content filters to leave alone. So you don't need to write these down right now or anything like that. It's all out there available in the online documentation. But you want to configure your services, applications, and devices to explicitly allow traffic to and from the Pearson URLs that are listed here. And by Pearson URLs, I mean any of these listed, not just the ones that say Pearson in them. So there's ones for TestNav, there's a content delivery system, there's Atom, which is you'll be using this year. There's ACT, which some of you'll be using. There's certificate URLs. So there's some third-party things that we take advantage of, and we need to make sure that those are explicitly allowed as well. The external traffic through your firewall flows on ports 80 and 443, which are standard internet ports, nothing unusual. But basically, any appliances or services dealing with security that may impede, reroute, delay, alter, block, anything in there between TestNav or the Pearson server should be configured to explicitly allow traffic to and from all these URLs. I can't stress this enough. This can bring testing in your entire district to a grinding halt if this is not configured correctly. And these are very complex products at times, and so it's worth your time to contact your vendor and tell them that I've got a list of URLs here. I need to make sure that they are not touched at all, that they can flow freely in and out, and just tell me all the places I need to configure this, and they should be able to tell you that easily. And many times there's multiple places that need to be configured in these products because they have different kinds of scans. And they have separate, block lists or allow lists for each one. So make sure that you're contacting your vendor for your products, firewalls, or content filters, because they're the subject matter experts, and they'll be able to tell you every place that you need to configure this so that it's not touched. Some special considerations for firewalls and content filters I also want to make you aware of. If you are using SSL decryption or inspection, you need to make an exception rule to not allow the scanning of the traffic at the URLs that I just showed you. Inspecting secured traffic can sometimes result in interrupting TestNav traffic. We've seen this in every year we get a handful of these that come in, and we have to kind of keep drilling down into their settings and finding out that this SSL decryption or inspection is on, and it's causing some sort of a delay, which is blocking testing. So make sure that either it's turned off or you're at least explicitly allowing the testing URLs to and from so that they're not touched by SSL decryption. Same thing applies to reverse DNS lookup. Need to make a rule preventing reverse DNS lookup against the provided URLs that I showed you. Our test content is hosted in Amazon Web Services, so it is a dynamic set of IPs. There's no static set of IPs that we can provide. Because of that, the IPs go in and out of service with various different websites throughout the world, right? When we spin up new servers, we get new IPs. When we have high load, when we roll back down, those IPs are released. Somebody else may pick them up. But reverse DNS lookup can sometimes result in false positives. So it looks up an IP and sees if there's any sort of report of that IP being associated with malware or something like that. Because of the dynamic nature of Amazon Web Services and IP addresses, there's a potential to get what I would call a false positive, where it says, hey, this is a bad IP. We need to block traffic to this because it's associated with this bad thing that we're not allowing. Where in fact, because it's just dynamic IPs in Amazon, we got assigned an IP that somebody else previously used. So again, failure to fully allow the TestNav URLs can result in errors during student testing. So that is my scare tactic. I can't stress this enough. This is probably a 10-minute job once you get some advice from your content vendors, or your security vendors, to input these and make sure that they're okay. But they're a nightmare to diagnose if you're in the middle of testing. So I can't stress this enough. Make sure you're taking care of this in advance so that you don't have any issues. So from there, we'll change gears from firewalls and content filters, and we'll start talking about TestNav setup on student devices. So the detailed setup steps for all supported devices can be found on the TestNav online support page, which I showed you earlier. The device setup varies slightly by device type, obviously, Mac, Windows, Linux, etc. Setup generally follows a few main steps: verifying system requirements, making that you're sure your student devices meet those requirements, viewing the setup instructions quickly to make sure you understand what's involved in installing TestNav on those various devices, running through the install process, which probably takes all of a minute or two, and then, as we'll talk about a little bit later, verifying the installation using AppCheck on a handful of devices to make sure that everything appears to be functioning correctly on your student devices. The hardware requirements are listed here. You don't need to write these down. Again, these are on the online support pages. These, I don't believe, have changed in several years. So hardware-wise, I don't think that you're going to run into any wall. I think probably the most recent change is we started adding Apple Silicon for Macs on here. But other than that, I don't think that we've changed anything in years. So we haven't deleted anything. We've just kind of added support for something.
Hey, Brian, there's a question in the chat asking if the TestNav version for Utah Aspire Plus is the same for ACT.
Yes, correct. So we released, I'll talk about that a little bit later, but we released one version of TestNav that's designed to be used for the upcoming school year across all of our customers, whether it's Utah specifically or ACT, Aspire, stuff like that. So yeah, once you install TestNav once, it'll work for both. It'll do double duty. Software requirements, meaning operating system requirements for TestNav. You can see that we've got Chrome, iPad, Linux, Mac, Windows all listed out here. These are subject to change as the year goes on and new versions are released. So don't think that this is the final definitive only version. And I know that we list out, like using Chrome as an example, we list out Chrome 114 to 118. I do not believe that we are actually blocking any operating system. It's just simply these are the ones that we officially support. Obviously, if you go too far back, you're going to run the risk if there's some functionality in that operating system that TestNav relies on that won't be there. And in general, I think it's smart to stay within the supported window of operating systems that you see listed here. But it doesn't mean you're dead in the water if you have a version of Chrome OS, a Chromebook that can only go up to, let's say, 112 or something like that. But obviously, in general, you want to make sure that your student devices can fit within this. That's the smartest move because those are the officially supported ones. We'll still try to help you out. But if we hit a wall and you're not on a supported operating system, there's kind of a limit to what we can support after a certain point if we can't get any answers, especially if we run into an issue where it's the operating system version. So just be aware of that. This should be easy to fit in. I think we go back several years on all of these, so it shouldn't be an issue at all.
Brian, there's a follow-up to that. A user is asking, they use a stable channel on Chromebooks, which many are on the 119 or 120. Is this, will this or a subsequent version cause a problem, or like what's the chance of the latest OS being supported?
Oops, sorry. The chance is fine. I believe I took this screenshot just within the last week, so I don't know if 119 has been released. Maybe it has, and we just haven't. We're just testing it. Basically, what happens, and I guess I'll talk about this in a minute, is when a new version is released, we test it, look for any compatibilities. It usually can take a week to two because there's a lot of tests to go through, and we want to be thorough. But usually, it will be added to the support matrix here. So I don't anticipate that there's going to be any problems whatsoever with 119, 120, whatever is released this spring, unless we find something very specific that causes some sort of a test security issue or a performance issue or something like that. And that's exceedingly rare. So I'm not worried about that. You shouldn't be either.
Okay. And then Jan Curtis from Pinnacle is asking, do you know when macOS 12 will no longer be supported?
I don't know, but I suspect that, well, I suspect that when we find out, at least, is probably late spring, because we usually release a technical bulletin letting you know when, what versions of supported operating systems are going to fall off the supported list. And so if you go out and look at the support site that you have listed right here, this URL, on the left-hand side, there will be a link for technical bulletins, and you should be able to look at past technical bulletins and see about when that update comes out that says, hey, we're no longer going to be supporting these in the upcoming school year. That's a good metric to when you can at least expect the news about when 12 is going to be supported or not. Next slide here, upcoming support changes. I kind of covered this a little bit already as we've been talking about this. So Pearson aligns support requirements with changing technologies. When updates are released, Pearson first tests a beta version and reports bugs to the developers for the operating system. And then when the final version is publicly released, Pearson has to go through all the tests again to make sure that there was no bug introduced at the last minute and to ensure TestNav compatibility before we say we're going to support it. Pearson follows the lead of operating system vendors, and when hardware or software deprecates or is no longer supported, Pearson also drops support for it. So we're following their lead on what operating systems they're supporting. TestNav support page lists operating system versions currently being tested for compatibility. So the same page that shows you this list, also down below in that page will show you what operating systems are being currently tested right now. So from supported operating systems, we'll start talking about the setup for the various flavors of TestNav on different devices. First, we'll talk about desktop. That kind of encompasses Windows, Mac, or Linux operating systems. So some considerations that you want to be aware of on these is that any device initialization applications or desktop restoration software. I'm using Deep Freeze as an example. They are not the only one, and I'm not picking on them. It's just the type of software that it is. Basically, when a student logs out of a device and then they log back in, that device is restored back to the same condition every time by, let's say, Deep Freeze or a third-party product that also does the same thing. And that's a good thing from the perspective of the school administrators and the tech folks, because that way you keep the device from being modified by the student too much and becoming unusable. The problem is that we save a couple of files in a directory that we want to have retained. So underneath the user's home folder, so if I signed into a Mac or Windows machine and I signed in as Brian under users/Brian, TestNav will create a Pearson folder. And we want that Pearson folder to be exempted from any deep freeze or related process that wipes out files in it, because we save log files of what's going on when people are testing so that we can troubleshoot issues. And we save an encrypted backup file in case it's necessary to save student responses because of a loss of connectivity. And we don't want those two types of files to be destroyed. So just be aware of that. I don't know that many people are using this software anymore, but it's something to be aware of. Obviously, in order for TestNav to create that Pearson directory underneath the user's home folder, the user has to have read-write access to their home directory, which is standard out-of-the-box operating system functionality. But every now and then we'll run across a school or district that will tighten things down even further than what the operating system vendors can figure out of the box, and they won't give students read-write access to their home directory. And in that case, TestNav will not be able to run on that device, so just be aware of that. The next one, background applications and processes. So when TestNav, when a student logs into a test in TestNav, it expands, it goes into a kiosk mode, and it blocks out everything. The taskbar goes away in Windows, the dock goes away on Mac. You can't do task switching through either Command Tab or Alt Tab. You can't use Expose or anything like that on the Mac side. It also monitors to see if any other application tries to take over and become the active application. And because of that, you want to make sure that any background applications that are running are minimized or completely eliminated if possible. So I'm talking things like automatic antivirus updates, automatic operating system updates, any applications that automatically launch, or any applications that automatically display like a messaging to the screen using, let's say, email as an example, where it says, hey, you've got a new email from somebody. Any of those things, if they kick off in the middle of the test, could potentially kick a student out of a test because it could be an attempt to cheat. TestNav's not sure. And to be on the safe side, it's going to kick the student out of the test. They can get back in, but we want to minimize those disruptions if possible. So again, make sure that you've minimized or shut down any background applications or processes when they're testing so that they don't interfere. The next bullet point here, thin clients. I don't know if anybody's using a thin client at this point, but thin clients need to be thoroughly tested in the local infrastructure trials to verify successful operation with high-stakes testing. Thin clients can be a different animal, depending on how those are configured. And if you got any questions about that and you're actually using thin clients, you should call our support and discuss that with them to see what you're using, how it's configured, how it works, to see if there's going to be any potential security issues. The next one, Grammarly must be disabled. This is in wide use across many schools. You just want to be aware that you want to have that disabled. You don't want to find out on test day. As well as the next two lines here, Windows side, Cloud Clipboard History or Roaming, Windows Game Bar, Windows Cortana or Predictive Text must be disabled. And on the Mac side of things, you want to disable Siri or dictation services have to be disabled as well. So all those things that I listed out there, depending on how you've got things configured in your environment, maybe there's something in there that kind of raises a red flag. One suggestion I have is if you're running Mac, Windows, whatever, I don't think really anyone's testing on Linux, but Mac and Windows, let's say for the purpose of being realistic here, is you can create a generic account that's only used for testing, or a generic user. So normally when I sign in to do something on my machine, I'd sign in as Brian if I was a student. But on test day, I sign in as tester. And all these things are locked down appropriately. When I'm signed in as tester, I launch TestNav, I take my test. I don't have any disruptions because of any of these things I've listed out here. And then when I'm done taking my test, I log out as tester and I sign back in as Brian on my device. And I've got all the functionality that I would normally need to do my schoolwork or anything like that. So because Mac and Windows offer a lot of flexibility in what other things can be installed and configured on them, they can be trickier to set up in general for something like secure testing. So just be aware that one possible way around that is creating a generic user account specifically for the use of testing. And it's got things locked down appropriately so nothing interferes. Something else to also be aware of, and I'm sure this is not news to anybody because this has been going on for a couple of years now, is we have a block list in place which detects banned applications that must not be running on Windows and Mac testing devices. So to minimize test interruptions, schools must ensure the following applications are not running on student test devices during test attempts. So there's a whole list of them here. But basically when TestNav goes to launch or log into a test, if it sees any of these running, it will not let you into the test. So just be aware of this. And again, another way to address this is creating a generic user account on Mac or Windows devices that are specifically used for testing, and these sorts of things are disabled so that they don't potentially interfere. So moving on from Mac and Windows and Linux, we'll start talking about Chromebooks here quickly, which is pretty easy. On the Chromebook side, basically there's managed and unmanaged devices. Really, the only thing that you're going to be able to use right now are managed devices. That's because Google has kind of limited our options in that, and I'm not pointing fingers at them. I'm just saying that's just the way it is. So managed devices are the only ones that you can install TestNav on appropriately. You need to do that from the Google Admin Console. You need to make sure that you allow data to persist for the TestNav application because, again, we save log files and an encrypted backup file just in case we need it. And you want to set the TestNav application to run in kiosk mode. What that means is when you first boot up that Chromebook, you don't actually log into the Chromebook. In the lower left-hand corner, there'll be a little button. You can click on that. It shows all the apps that are approved to run in kiosk mode. You launch TestNav from there, okay? The next little point there, I talked briefly about that, unmanaged devices. So unmanaged Chromebooks or Chromeboxes purchased in 2017 and later cannot run in kiosk mode. So you cannot install an app in kiosk mode on an unmanaged Chromebooks if it was purchased after 2017. So I don't think that this would probably capture anybody at this point because you're talking about 6-7 years. I did manage to see one Chromebook, actually, ironically, in just the last week for a customer, different state. That was a 2016 Chromebook, so I'm stunned that it's still being used. But I don't think this is going to affect anybody. I think anybody who's got Chromebooks in their school environment probably has them managed because it's really easy to install things and deal with stuff. So just be aware of that. It has to be a managed device or Chromebook in order to install TestNav on it appropriately as a kiosk app. And then iOS, TestNav uses Apple Automatic Assessment Configuration, or AAC, to secure the iPad for testing when they go to take a test or log into a test. So the main steps: install TestNav, verify the installation using AppCheck. The first time that TestNav is launched on that device, it will display the Enable Microphone Permission message. You want to make sure that you click on OK to grant permission. That is required. Some considerations: TestNav can be installed on multiple devices using your MDM or mobile device management solution. What you do not want to use is MDM configured single app mode. If you do install TestNav with MDM's configured single app mode, it will conflict with AAC and it will not allow AAC to engage, and you will not be able to take a test on that device. So just be aware of that. No big deal. Just get TestNav on the iPad, and TestNav takes care of calling AAC to lock down the device when it's necessary and releasing it out of that mode when they're done with the test. Some things I want to make you aware of specifically for iOS that came to our attention this month is that iOS 17.0 to 17.2, we have identified an issue, an OS issue, because it was something that Apple had to fix. We worked with them once we identified it, which could potentially cause issues in some pretty rare circumstances with TestNav, and which should be resolved with iOS 17.3. We have contacted some districts that were having the issue that we saw, or the one district, I guess I should say, in a completely different state. They've updated to 17.3. They don't see the problem anymore. We worked with Apple. They said it should be addressed in 17.3. Just be aware 17.3 was released this week. So if you're going to be on iOS 17 on your iPads, I would recommend highly that you are on 17.3 so that you're just not even potentially affected by the 17.0 to .2 issue that was out there. And the next point is TestNav app for iOS is we have tentative plans to release a required TestNav update only for iPads on February 1st. And we're going to be releasing a technical bulletin at the end of the month on the support site to cover the update. So just be looking for that. But this really only affects, it doesn't affect Mac, Windows, Chromebook, or Linux or anything like that. It only affects iOS. It does not mean that you can't, my understanding is it doesn't mean that you can't test on the current version of TestNav for iOS, but if there's an edge case where it might become necessary, I guess is the best way to put it. So my recommendation is I would go out there and update this on February 1st when this rolls out. And again, look for the technical bulletin at the end of this month. It'll explain everything, and you can get that new version out there in plenty of time for online testing. Future update installation. So the updates, people will ask, will TestNav update on my student devices if I had it on there last year? And it can vary or differ by test device. Typically, TestNav only receives major app updates over the summer when school is not in session. So somewhere in July, usually we release the new version of TestNav that's going to be used for the entire upcoming school year. And barring anything either performance or security related, we do not have any mid-year updates. So you can see that the iOS one that I just talked about is a rarity. I can't remember the last time that happened, years and years and years ago. And so it's a very rare event, and I'm not worried about it happening normally. But just be aware that depending on what device that you're in, whether it automatically updates or not is something that will depend on what platform you're using. So Chrome devices will automatically update. So if you've got it installed and a new version comes out, it will automatically update. If you're running a Windows device and you installed TestNav through the Windows Store, it will automatically update. Okay. iOS, you're going to have to install it from the App Store when a new version comes out. And then Mac and Windows desktop apps. So if you actually download the Mac or the Windows desktop installer, then you're going to have to go out and download and install the new one the same way when there's a new version that comes out every summer. So if on the Windows side, if you can install from the Windows Store, that's probably the best option, simply because once you install it there, then it will keep automatically updating. So we've got firewalls and content filters configured. We've got TestNav on your student devices. Now we want to check quickly using a functionality called App Check to see if the student device has any obvious issues running TestNav and securing the device. So App Check is functionality that is built into TestNav. There's no additional installation or configuration required to run it. It is accessed from the TestNav app menu. So basically you go to your Utah login screen, and in the upper right-hand corner, you click on the button and select App Check that you see there. And then it'll bring up the screen in the bottom middle here. And you're just going to click on the Run App Check button. Disregard the configuration identifier field. That's no longer needed for Utah. It takes 5-10 seconds, something like that, to do this on a device. Basically, it will to see if there's any prohibited services running, prohibited applications running. It will check to see if it can connect to the testing server, if it can lock down the device in a kiosk mode. It will actually try to download a handful of different item types from our testing servers, simply to see if those item types have been blocked by firewalls or content filters. It's not a perfect test for that because firewalls and content filters are so complex, but we're trying to hit all the major things to see if we can identify any issues right up front that might need to be addressed so that you can have time to contact us and work through them so that when it's time to do the real tests, everything goes smooth. So you don't have to do this on every student device. I would just do this on a kind of a cross-section of the types of devices that you're running. So, you know, each operating system, maybe each hardware platform, something like that that you're using. I would just run this on a handful of devices just to flush out any obvious issues so that we have time to work with you and get them fixed. Once you run this, you'll get a notification, kiosk mode pass, so it was able to lock down the device in this case, connectivity to TestNav pass, or you can see that the bottom screenshot there, we were trying to download some specific test files and they were being blocked, and that's probably a content filter or a firewall or something like that that's interfering. So we'll let you know, pass, fail, what's going on, and again, if you have any issues when it comes up, feel free to contact us. We're more than happy to work with you to resolve all that stuff. Finally, on App Check, the App Check will error if Cloud Clipboard History or Roaming is on, Game Bar or Cortana. That's all on Windows. On the Mac side, I mentioned this earlier, Siri or Dictation. If it sees it, it'll let you know. So TestNav will check during App Check for these things. It also checks when the student logs into the test and every single time that they navigate within the test to see if any of these are turned on. And if it finds that service is enabled, it will actually display an error message and the student will be forced to leave the test because these are all potential security-related issues. So just be aware on your devices, Mac, Windows, that you want to have those disabled or turned off. And again, if you can create a generic user for testing only, then that will have kind of help you streamline your ability to disable certain things so they don't interfere with online testing. There is also functionality on that same screen where you clicked on the Run App Check button to run functionality called Network Check. Basically, Network Check is just what it sounds like. It's used to evaluate current bandwidth and the ability to test a specified number of students. So you click on that Run Network Check button. It'll pop up a window in the upper right here to say how many devices do you plan on testing, a maximum number of devices. In this case, we just input 100. You click on that Start Diagnostic Test. It will do a quick bandwidth check to see what kind of bandwidth do I see on that device right now in that school. And based on that bandwidth, it'll crunch some numbers and say I see, in this case, in my lower left-hand corner, 57 megabits per second. I wanted to test 100 student devices, and it looks like I'm going to be able to successfully do that. Or if it runs the test and it does the math and it says the number of devices that you put in there is not going to be able to support it with the bandwidth that I see right now, it'll give you a warning. So just be aware of that. I don't think anyone's going to have any bandwidth issues at this juncture. Bandwidth, like I said, is abundant, plentiful, and cheap. And schools have 90+% of the schools in the nation, I think, meet the E-rate guidelines. So I just don't think that that's going to be an issue. I've been out in Utah and seen it, and you guys have great infrastructure out there, so I just don't see it. But it's worth running that this test in maybe a couple different schools. Keep in mind that when you do this test makes a big difference. So don't run it at 3 in the morning when no one's on your network. You're going to get unrealistic bandwidth numbers. I would recommend running this at peak bandwidth usage time and putting in the peak number of devices that you plan on testing in that location or that school. And that's kind of your worst case scenario. If it comes back okay, then you can rest easy. If you've got any warnings or anything like that, you can reach out to us and we'll be happy to talk about it with you. So changing gears quickly, this is all the installation stuff that we wanted to cover. I want to talk quickly about the early warning system because you may encounter some messages from that. So the early warning system is a background process in TestNav that requires no additional installation or configuration efforts. It displays messages to the screen in the case some sort of an issue is detected. It monitors background applications and connectivity, so it looks to see if any other application tries to take over and compromise test security. It looks to see if you continue to have connectivity out to the testing servers, either up or down. And if necessary, it stages student responses in an encrypted backup file and transmits those student responses to the Pearson servers for scoring when your connectivity's been restored. So it does all that stuff. It does it under the hood. You don't have to manually do any of that. But it's possible that it might start to display a message if it encounters anything that compromises performance or security or connectivity or any of that stuff. There's multiple error codes out there. I can show you where to get those. The majority of those potential issues that you might run into can be tracked down to a few main scenarios. Connectivity, either TestNav is unable to retrieve or download content, or if it's unable to transmit or upload responses. 2, save response file issues. So if it's unable to read or write to the default SRF location, which is on the student device in their home directory itself, shouldn't be an issue. Again, as long as you've given them permission to their home directory on Mac and Windows, which is standard OS vendor functionality, you should be fine on iPads and Chromebooks. It writes to the device itself, so you shouldn't have any issues there. Number 3, potential security issues. So if TestNav detects that an application launches while TestNav is in secure mode, it could kick the student out. Any application attempts to capture focus, any running application messages to the stream. I've talked about this already. So again, generic user account solves all these if that's something that you can do. If you do encounter an early warning system message, It will contain a specific error code, so it'll say error number whatever, and it'll give you a message. The complete error code documentation can be found in the TestNav online support page. All the error codes are listed out there you could possibly experience. It looks just like what you see here. It's got the number. It tells you in the middle box the message that was displayed to the screen to the student. And then on the right-hand side, for each of these, it will tell you what you can do to get past that error code and continue testing. So just be aware all these error codes are out there. Just be aware of where they're at, know how to get to them in case you run into them, so that you can potentially solve any issues that you encounter first by yourself and having to call support. If you do need to call us, by all means, we're happy to help you out, but usually you can get yourself back on your feet a lot faster if you know where these error codes are listed out online and how to get some advice from this online documentation on how to solve your problem. And then finally on error codes, I do want to call out these two error codes, 9058, 9059. The message that they'll see on the screen is that the username or password you entered is incorrect. This is a potentially misleading error code. If you try to put in your username or password, but you are not on the Utah login screen, then it will display this 90589 or 9059. You're going to see the message, the username or password you entered is incorrect, and all you're going to be thinking about is I must have miskeyed this, or maybe I got the wrong password or username, whatever, right? It's potentially misleading because if students tend to play around, and you can see there's a bunch of customers that we support here on this right-hand screenshot. Utah is just one of them, obviously. Students tend to play around. They might go into the wrong login screen, or maybe a student that used that device before was in the wrong login screen, and when they launched TestNav again, it took them right back into, let's say, the Colorado login screen. They try to log into that test, and it gives them a 9058, 9059. That's simply because they're trying to log into a Utah test on a non-Utah login screen. So the very first message or thing that I would check if somebody gets a 9058 or 59 is, are they on the Utah login screen? If they are not, go to the upper right-hand corner, click on the button and select choose a different customer. It will take you back to the main screen, and then select Utah, and you should be good to go. One thing that we want to make people aware of, because somebody already brought this up actually, is Utah Aspire Plus versus ACT. What version of, what are the differences between testing in TestNav from both of them? On Aspire Plus, iPads and Linux are supported. That's not the case for ACT. Firewalls and content filters, you want to allow testnav.com. And you want to do act.org. So there's some differences there. TestNav configuration, adamexam.com is the admin site you'll be using. On the other side is testadmin.act.org is the admin site you'll be using. So just be aware that there's some slight differences. Overall, they overlap. And again, if you use the entire list of URLs where you're configuring your firewalls and content filters, you're going to cover both of these, so you won't have any issues. And then finally, the last thing I want to quickly talk about is support. So there's some multiple support options. There is the Pearson Help Desk and Technology Office Hours. The Technology Office Hours is a way to schedule time with a field engineer, somebody in my team, myself, or somebody else. It's a one-on-one virtual meeting, or you can invite your whole team. That's fine too. Time slots range from 15 minutes to 1 hour. This is where you can talk through technology-related edge cases, setup instructions, challenges, what issues you're having. You can go online into a form and you can schedule your technology office hours. It taps into my team's calendar, each of our individual calendars, and only shows meeting times that are available for one of us. So you can pick the day and the time and know that we're open during that time, and give us a little bit of information, and then it will send out an invite to both you and me or whoever on my team is doing it. And again, you can invite your team as well. It will be a Teams meeting, so you can get online. I can share my screen. You can share your screen. We can talk things over. So just be aware this is an option out there. There is also the option to call the 800 number directly and tap right into support right away. So just be aware of that. If it's a time-sensitive issue, it should go without saying, but if it's a time-sensitive issue, use the 800 number. If you use office hours, the soonest that you can get any sort of an office hours meeting is 4 hours from when you try to book it. And that's so that nobody gets caught flat-footed or by surprise and accidentally skips a meeting. So we put a little buffer in there of 4 hours. But if you have a time-sensitive issue, call the 800 number. If you've got something technology related and you can afford to schedule a meeting time, especially if it's more amenable to invite some team members or something like that as well on your side, take advantage of office hours. We're happy to help you out. The big thing is we want to make sure that any questions you have are answered, that you go into testing feeling confident that things are going to work. You've ironed out any wrinkles, and you're good to go. So with that said, I don't know if there's any unanswered questions, but we'll kind of open it up here. Either I'm really good or everyone is asleep. It's a win either way. So,
well, you did get a compliment in the chat that says it was a good review of the main points, and thanks for your time from James in Alpine. So,
well, if there's no questions here, again, if something pops up, I'll be happy to answer it. But if there's not, if you're like me, you're on your way driving home and suddenly something bubbles into your brain you forgot to ask, please reach out to us, office hours, 800 number. We're happy to answer any questions you have until you're confident that things are ironed out and things are going to go smoothly. So don't hesitate to call us.
Awesome. Thanks, Brian. Just as a reminder for our participants, Emily did record this, so we'll get this up on our assessment YouTube channel for review if you ever need to look back at it. And like Brian said, if you have questions, go ahead and reach out to us. We're always happy to help. And thank you so much for participating, and we'll see you another day.